Experienced hikers set out into the wilderness with no signs of danger ahead of them. No storm warnings, no visible threats, nothing to suggest that anything was about to go wrong. And then, without warning, one of them began to scream. Not in fear, but in pain. Blood poured from his eyes as he clawed at his throat before collapsing to the ground convulsing. Within hours, the others began to follow, running, panicking, and losing control of their minds, all except one. One girl survived, and what she witnessed still doesn't make sense. What happened in the mountains that day? Was it exposure, poison, or something far more unsettling? Tonight, we're heading deep into Siberia, into isolation, confusion, and a mystery that turned a routine trek into a waking nightmare. This is the story of the Kamar-Daban incident. In August of 1993, a group of 7 hikers had set out into the Kamar-Daban mountain range. Leading them was Ludmila Korovina, an experienced and well-respected hiking instructor. This was not an unprepared group. These were trained individuals who understood the risks of the wilderness and knew how to handle themselves in difficult conditions. The plan was straightforward: a multi-day trek across rugged but manageable terrain. There was nothing about the trip that suggested it would end in tragedy. By August 4th, however, conditions began to change. The weather took a turn for the worse, bringing cold rain, strong winds, and reduced visibility. Still, this was not unusual for the region, and the group pressed on. But then something happened that could not be explained by the weather alone. Without warning, one of the hikers, Alexander, began to behave erratically. He started screaming, loud, uncontrollable, and filled with pain. He clawed at his throat as if he couldn't breathe. His face twisted in panic. Then came the blood, began to pour from his ears and his eyes before he collapsed, convulsing violently on the ground. Panic spread almost instantly through the group. This was not hypothermia, and it was not altitude sickness. No one could understand what they were witnessing, and then, just as suddenly, another hiker began to exhibit the exact same symptoms. Screaming, disoriented and bleeding, they too collapsed. One of the group members ran blindly into the forest, crashing into trees as if trying to escape something unseen. Another tried to hide behind a rock, as though that might offer protection from whatever was happening. Within a matter of hours, the group completely unraveled. No coordination, no logic, and no clear sense of what to do next. Korovina, the group's leader, attempted to regain control, but even her experience wasn't enough to stop what was happening. Eventually, she too collapsed. With her gone, any remaining structure disappeared. There was no leadership left, only fear and confusion. Only one person remained, Valentina Udachenko. She watched as her entire group died around her, one by one, in ways she could not explain. It was violent, chaotic, and fast. And in that moment, she realized something terrifying. If she stayed, she would be next. Valentina would later describe how quickly everything unfolded. There was no gradual decline, no slow onset. It was immediate and overwhelming. Alexander was the first to fall, his screams echoing through the mountains as he clawed at his throat, unable to breathe. His eyes were wide with terror, and blood then came from his ears and eyes before he collapsed. After that, the group seemed to lose all sense of control. Another hiker ran wildly, slamming into trees as if fleeing from something that no one else could see. Others dropped to the ground, convulsing, or tried to hide behind rocks in a desperate attempt to escape. No one stayed together. No one could think clearly. It was as if something had completely overtaken them. Even Korovina, the most experienced among them, could not stabilize the situation. And when she finally went down, Valentina understood there was nothing left to do but run. So she did. Alone and terrified, she fled into the Siberian wilderness with no real plan and no understanding of what had just occurred. For days, she wandered, avoiding the campsite and the bodies of her friends. Eventually, she came across a river and began to follow it, hoping it would lead her to safety. Somehow, against all odds, it did. When rescue teams eventually located the bodies, what they found only deepened the mystery. The hikers were scattered across the area, some partially clothed, others positioned in ways that suggested panic rather than a slow, peaceful death from exposure. Despite the strange circumstances, the official cause of death was ruled as hypothermia. But that explanation doesn't fully hold up. Hypothermia can cause confusion and even irrational behavior, but it does not typically cause sudden, violent collapse or bleeding from the eyes and ears. It doesn't spread through a group this quickly, nor does it explain the intensity of what was described by the only survivor. So what actually happened out there? One theory suggests that the group may have been exposed to a toxic substance, possibly from a military test or an environmental containment. This could explain the rapid onset of symptoms and severe physical reactions. Another theory points to infrasound, low-frequency vibrations caused by wind moving through the mountains. These vibrations are known to cause anxiety, fear, and even panic in humans, which might explain the sudden breakdown in behavior. There is also the possibility that something the group consumed, whether contaminated food, water, or even toxic plant life, triggered the reaction. The official conclusion remains hypothermia due to extreme weather, and while that may explain some of the confusion, it fails to address the most disturbing elements of the case: the sudden onset, the violent reactions, and the physical trauma witnessed by Valentina. And then there is the possibility that something happened out there that we simply just do not understand. It is difficult not to compare this case to the Dyatlov Pass incident. Both involve experienced hikers, both involve sudden and irrational behavior, and both end with more questions than answers. But the Kamar-Daban incident is different in one critical way. Someone survived, and even she could not explain what happened. There was no clear cause, no satisfying explanation, only fragments of terror scattered across a remote landscape. So the question remains, what did they encounter out there? And if it wasn't the cold, would we even recognize it if it happened again?